Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating tension right at the heart of our intellectual landscape. We're talking about the friction between established institutional authority and the uncompromising and sometimes messy pursuit of objective truth. It's a dynamic that literally affects how we validate knowledge, how we innovate, and ultimately, how we decide who even gets to ask the important questions. So, let's jump right in. Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. Here is what we'll be covering today. 1. The prestige trap. 2. The cost of stagnation. 3. Evidence over accolades. 4. The three pillars. And finally, 5. Reclaiming intellectual rigor. Section 1. The prestige trap. So here's a fundamental question for you. Should we actively ask questions, or do we just believe what people with prizes say? Now, I know it sounds simple, but it highlights a profound psychological bias that honestly pervades a lot of our institutions. We kind of operate under this assumption that, well, because someone was deemed good enough for a prize in the past, their current assertions must just automatically be right. But does that historical prestige mean we shouldn't answer the undecorated person who brings a serious, valid question to the table? And this brilliantly illustrates the two competing modes of validation we're dealing with here. On one side, we've got pedigree-based validation. This is a pretty flawed system where we accept information as true primarily because the source was recognized for excellence at some previous point in time. It treats a historical win like its permanent epistemic authority. On the other side, we have evidence-based validation. Now, this evaluates the empirical data and the internal logic of the inquiry entirely on its own merits, completely ignoring the background of the person asking.
Because the reality is, intellectual merit isn't just some static trophy that you can put on a shelf. It's a continuous, ongoing process of verification. When we rely on past achievements as a proxy for current accuracy, we actually halt the process of discovery. We do it to maintain the comfort of a known reputation, sure. But in doing so, we completely ignore the fact that past excellence is absolutely no guarantee against present errors, or the emergence of new, contradictory data.
Section 2. The cost of stagnation. The text lays out a really clear mandate here. It says the ethical obligation of any intellectual body is to provide answers to serious questions, even when those questions are compromising or rattle the foundation of the status quo. I want you to just absorb the gravity of that for a second. When organizations systematically avoid hard questions because they're deemed too compromising, it sends a very clear signal. It tells us the institution cares far more about its own self-preservation and protecting its hierarchy than fulfilling its actual, stated mission of finding the truth. And this defensive posture leads to what's defined here as epistemic closure. Basically, this is a state where an institution becomes entirely incapable of integrating new information if that info contradicts its established hierarchy. And man, that is a dangerous place to be. It leads to incredible organizational fragility because the institution completely loses its ability to adapt to external shifts. And perhaps, worst of all, it drives away top-tier talent who find their natural curiosity just stifled by rigid power structures. Now, what's really interesting about this is if you consider a seemingly strange inquiry like this, can you really always add 1 to a very big number? Or is there a vague area where numbers are so big that they can only be called symbols? Now, I know it sounds almost childlike at first glance, but it's actually a deeply serious philosophical question about the absolute limits of mathematics. Yet, because it might challenge foundational assumptions, the establishment might dismiss it purely because of who was asking it rather than what is actually being asked. Here's another prime example, straight from the source text. Is the definition of infinity correct, or is it just an incorrect description? Imagine taking this question to a highly decorated mathematician. I mean, it challenges the absolute bedrock of the discipline. This is exactly what it feels like to rattle the status quo with a difficult inquiry. The systemic instinct is to just ignore it, maybe label it too hard, simply because engaging with it threatens the perceived infallibility of the establishment. Section 3. Evidence over accolades. We really need to directly confront a sophisticated gatekeeping mechanism here, prioritizing the speaker's biography over the merit of the inquiry. The assumption that a lack of prizes somehow invalidates a serious question suggests that the right to inquire is just some privilege earned through past recognition, rather than a fundamental component of intellectual rigor. This mindset completely elevates the status of the asker over the actual truth of the answer. We have to remember that a prize is a reminder to take answers seriously, not a protecting shield. Obviously, an accolade means something, right? It reminds us that insights from that individual have had immense value, and protecting the reputation of those with accolades is nice, but it should never, ever barricade progress or prevent rigorous scrutiny from the undecorated. The evolution of knowledge requires friction, absolutely, regardless of who is providing it. Section 4, the 3 pillars. Let's move to and see how this builds. To rectify the biases inherent in prestige-based systems, the text proposes 3 specific pillars of valid inquiry. 1. Inquiry merit. 2. Evidence dominance. And 3. Status-agnostic review. This framework ensures the pursuit of truth is governed by logic and data, and not just a hierarchy of past winners. Let's break down that first pillar, inquiry merit. This focuses entirely on the internal structure of the question itself. Evaluating a serious question must be based on its foundation in logic and its ability to identify gaps in our current understanding. The asker's formal accolades or, complete lack thereof are entirely irrelevant. If the question is structurally sound and logically valid, it possesses inquiry merit, period. The second pillar is evidence dominance. This means prioritizing external, verifiable facts. Empirical results must always take precedence over the historical reputation of the speaker. It's a simple but really profound rule. In any conflict between a highly decorated individual's opinion and new, verifiable data, the data remains supreme. The evidence literally dominates the pedigree. The third pillar is status-agnostic review. This ensures absolute neutrality in the evaluation process. It demands that questions are never dismissed or ignored simply based on the absence of a prize. The validity of a query exists completely independently of the person posing it. It levels the playing field so that ideas can finally compete on equal footing. Furthermore, institutions must adopt what the text calls the response mandate. This means that hard or compromising questions must be addressed directly and publicly. Actually, think about it. If a question rattles the status quo, that's actually a really strong indicator of its potential importance. It cannot be suppressed or sidelined for institutional convenience, or just to avoid intellectual cowardice. It mandates real engagement with difficult truths. Section 5, reclaiming intellectual rigor. So, the crucial point is this. To reclaim intellectual rigor, we absolutely must value answers more than the accolades of the people providing them. We have to stop the steady erosion of institutional trust that happens when the public sees hierarchies being protected over actual discoveries. We need an environment where every serious question gets a serious answer, and where we ensure no individual is ever considered too decorated to be questioned. Professional and academic bodies simply must move beyond this prestige barrier. Which leaves us with a critical question to consider. Will our institutions continue to defend their historical trophies, or will they finally dare to answer the undecorated questions that rattle the status quo? Think about your own spaces, and maybe your own biases regarding authority and evidence. The future of innovation really depends on how we answer that question. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today, and remember, keep asking the hard questions.